How can I receive a letter from my deceased mother-in-law? I was astounded as I stared at an envelope that was in my home's mailbox. The letter was from my mother-in-law, whose funeral had just been completed yesterday. I had loved her because she had always been very kind to me since the beginning of our marriage. We often dined out and shopped together. And we were close like friends who were years apart in age. I was devastated by her sudden death. Even after the funeral had ended, I still couldn't fully accept the reality of her passing. Amidst this, I was deeply shocked to receive a letter from her. When I hurriedly checked the contents of the letter, it contained something unexpected. First, the reason why I received this letter was apparently because my mother-in-law had asked a priest to deliver it to me after her death. Furthermore, the letter instructed me to open a wood chest in her home, which apparently even contained a secret door. The method to open this secret door was also clearly described. Finally, the letter instructed me to open it alone. I checked the time, and it was when my brother-in-law's family, who lived with my mother-in-law, were all out at school or work. I immediately went to her house, entered with the spare key, and opened the secret door of the chest as instructed by the letter. Good, it opened. I was relieved that it had opened successfully and checked what was inside. What is this? My name is Susan. I'm 35 years old and work from home as a web designer. 5 years ago, I met Tony, who is 4 years older than me, through a friend's introduction, and we are still very happily married. However, we do not yet have children. We both love children and had hoped to have them soon after getting married. But unfortunately, we have not been able to conceive. In the past, I was deeply troubled by our inability to have children and became quite depressed. But there was always someone who treated me kindly. That was my mother-in-law. Susan, don't stress so much. It's okay to not rush. How about we go to the new waffle shop near the station for a change? My mother-in-law always encouraged me and spoke warmly to me. I loved her for her brightness, kindness, and ability to care for others. I was saved by her many times, and gradually, I worried less about having children. Even now, my desire to have children hasn't changed. But we are not pursuing aggressive fertility treatments. Instead, we are leaving things to nature. Tony often travels for work, so when he's away, my mother-in-law and I would go out to eat or shop, just like friends who were years apart. My mother-in-law lived near our house, in a household she shared with my brother-in-law's family, who have 3 children. It seemed that she got along well with his family, but my brother-in-law and his wife, Erica, often hurled insults at us because we didn't have children. Susan, you still haven't had kids? We have 3 adorable children, you know. It's unfilial not to have children. Cut your ties with your mother-in-law already. Whenever Erica said such things triumphantly, my brother-in-law Chris would join in and mock us. Erica's right. Well, Tony has always been a mediocre guy. Even if you guys had kids, they'd probably be nothing special. Initially, my husband and I would retaliate against such awful remarks from them. However, they never listened to anything we said, so eventually, we stopped responding. We began to avoid dealing with them as much as possible. They treated us terribly, but they acted like good people in front of my mother-in-law. As a result, she was unaware of their true nature. We didn't want to worry her unnecessarily, so we never told her about their behavior. One holiday, my husband, my mother-in-law, and I planned to dine out together. When it was time to meet, we headed to her house. However, unlike usual, when she would be waiting outside early, my mother-in-law was not there. Huh? Is mother not ready yet? It's unusual. Well, she'll be out soon. My husband and I didn't worry too much and waited for her to come out. But she didn't appear after 5 minutes, nor after 10, and she didn't answer her phone either. What's happened to her? Getting anxious, we tried ringing the doorbell at her house. When there was no response, we decided to enter using the spare key. "Hey, Mom?" As my husband called out while taking off his shoes in the entrance, there was no response. With a sense of dread, we hurried to find her. Then, we discovered her collapsed in the guest room. "Mother!" I screamed and ran to her, and my husband immediately called an ambulance. The brother-in-law's family must have been out, because there was no one else in the house but my mother-in-law. The ambulance arrived in about 8 minutes, and she was quickly taken to the hospital. But unfortunately, she passed away. It was a stroke. My husband and I couldn't accept the sudden separation from her. We both cried so much we thought we might run out of tears. However, there was a lot to do, like preparing for the funeral. We couldn't remain sad and withdrawn forever. We decided to have a family funeral, and the eldest son, my brother-in-law Chris, was to serve as the chief mourner. For my mother-in-law's sake, we had to conduct the funeral properly. So my husband and I coordinated with him to prepare together. However, even during the preparations and meetings with the funeral home, I could sense a somewhat reluctant attitude from my brother-in-law. Chris seemed indifferent to his mother's death, but he did fulfill his duties as the chief mourner during the wake and funeral, at least minimally. However, he would quickly call my husband over after only a brief chat with the relatives. Then he would leave the table early, causing the relatives to glare at him in disapproval. Moreover, during the meal with relatives after the funeral, Chris was the first to take his seat and didn't even try to stand up. Tony urged him to greet everyone, but Chris just kept drinking beer. Next to him, his wife Erica was also just drinking beer. So Tony and I hurried to speak with the relatives and talk about my mother-in-law. Perhaps because they saw their parents just drinking and eating. Chris and Erica's 3 children were also engrossed in their handheld gaming devices. They were laughing loudly and occasionally jostling each other, creating an atmosphere that didn't seem appropriate for a post-funeral gathering. None of Chris's family seemed to mourn the death of my mother-in-law. The relatives probably sensed their attitude. They didn't try to speak with Chris or Erica, and only shared farewells and memories with Tony and me. Even as the relatives' attitudes changed blatantly, there was no change in Chris's family. They kept ordering beers one after another, talking about the inheritance and planning a vacation during the morning leave, having been taken care of by my mother-in-law during her life. I wondered how they could be so disrespectful. I looked at Chris's family with disdain. The next morning, Tony left early for various errands. As I stayed home, I went to check the mailbox to get the newspaper and noticed an envelope inside. Who could it be from? When I took the letter and checked, it was addressed to me. And the sender was surprisingly my mother-in-law. How could there be a letter from her? Surprised, I returned to the living room of our house and opened the letter. It contained something I hadn't anticipated. It appeared that my mother-in-law had asked a priest to mail this letter to me after her death. The letter contained instructions to open a wood chest at her house, how to open the hidden door in the chest, and the contact information of her lawyer. Lastly, it instructed me to open the chest alone. I traced her letter multiple times. She was slender, but her handwriting was large and strong. It was indeed reflective of her spirited way of life, and I took a deep breath. Then I looked at the clock. 9:30 a.m. No one should be at her house now. Muttering to myself, I quickly got ready and headed to her house. The children must be at school by now, and Chris and Erica had left early in the morning. I saw on Erica's social media this morning that they were going out just the day after the funeral, sending their kids to school while boasting about enjoying their day off using morning leave. If her post was true, there should be no one at their house. I had to go now, or I wouldn't know when the next chance would be. I opened the front door of my mother-in-law's house with my spare key and entered slowly. The absence of my mother-in-law, who would have welcomed me with a smile, saddened me immensely. Clutching my aching chest, I entered her room. The wood chest, said to be her bridal furniture, was quite old. However, perhaps because she occasionally maintained it, the chest opened smoothly. Then, just as described in the letter, I reached for the hidden door in the back of the drawer. Good, it opened. Relieved that it opened successfully, I checked what was inside. There, I found the items described in the letter and one more document. What is this? I stared at the document, feeling my mother-in-law's love and nearly bursting into tears. I felt like crying out right there, but I had to leave her house quickly. If someone returned and saw me, it would be bad. The letter from my mother-in-law had instructed me to handle this alone. After returning home with the documents, I contacted the lawyer mentioned in the letter and reported my mother-in-law's death. Then, as I was about to ask Tony and Chris's family to gather this weekend, an email arrived at that moment. The sender was Erica, my brother-in-law's wife. The email said she had significant news and wanted us to gather at her house this weekend. What could Erica possibly want to discuss? I had a bad feeling. Although suspicious, it would be odd to refuse, so I agreed to her request. That weekend, Tony and I went to Chris's house, feeling tense about the meeting. Chris and Erica had a triumphant, unpleasant smirk on their faces. And their 3 children were not present. They must have left the kids somewhere else. As soon as Tony and I sat down, they flaunted a document. "This is the will that Mom left," Erica declared loudly. The signature on the will was indeed my mother-in-law's. And it stated that all her assets were to be inherited by Chris and his wife. See, it says here that we inherit all the assets, right? So, you guys won't get a single penny from the inheritance. Too bad. Chris laughed loudly, his face looking very ugly. Tony was puzzled, but I stood up silently and returned with the lawyer I had asked to wait outside. Who is he? Chris and Erica were confused by the sudden appearance of the lawyer. Tony was also surprised, as he didn't know the lawyer had been waiting outside. This person is a lawyer who was close to Mother before she passed. I introduced him briefly, and Chris and Erica's faces slowly turned from dumbfounded to angry. A lawyer? Why did you bring someone like that here? It was your mother's instruction. She wanted the lawyer to help us smoothly create the inheritance division agreement. Chris and Erica shouted that they didn't need a lawyer. Chris banged the table again and gestured at the will with his chin. Mom left a will. With this, we don't need a lawyer. Upon hearing that, the lawyer quietly raised his hand. Are you certain that this document was entirely written by your mother? Chris raised his voice as if it were obvious. The lawyer shook his head sorrowfully right there and then. This cannot be recognized as a valid will. A holographic will must be entirely handwritten by the person. The lawyer pointed at the word "will" at the beginning and her signature at the end. The name was written in a familiar handwriting. But the rest of the document appeared to be printed by a computer or something similar. The previously noisy living room fell silent. As if propelled, Chris reached out for the will and brought it closer to his face. But doing so would not change the text. It was only filled with neatly printed Gothic type. Huh? Suddenly, my husband pointed at Chris. Why is the back of the paper so clean? Upon closer inspection, indeed, there was something odd about the will. The handwriting in the signature part and the rest of the text are different. Could this will have been forged? At the lawyer's remark, Chris and his wife Erica visibly shuddered. What are you talking about? We would never do such a thing. Why are you getting so worked up? What if it was forged, what then? As Erica spoke, the lawyer stated. Forging a will constitutes the crime of forgery of private documents. Hearing this, they turned pale. While they were flustered and shouting incoherent excuses, the lawyer delivered a crucial piece of information. Susan has a notarized will, so the will you have is invalid. What? Chris and his wife were shocked and wide-eyed. What's this? I didn't hear about it. The letter I received from my mother-in-law mentioned that she had hidden the notarized will behind a secret door in the wood chest. We didn't know either. It was only from the letter we received recently that Mother told us where she had hidden this. The letter included not only practical information but also why she had made a notarized will and why she had told me about it. She had been feeling her health decline and had prepared a will. But she suspected that Chris and his wife might alter it. I had thought that she didn't know anything about Chris and his wife's true nature. But it seems she had somewhat realized their greediness. The notarized will stated that the property should be equally divided between Chris and Tony. She had prepared something like this. Chris and his wife were astonished, with their eyes wide open. Then, as if struck by a realization, Chris shouted loudly. That's right. But the beneficiary of Mom's life insurance is me, right? It should be me, the eldest son. His eyes blazing, he yelled. I responded with a cold voice. In addition to the notarized will, your mother also entrusted me with the life insurance certificate. The beneficiary is me. The hidden door in the wood chest contained not only the notarized will, but also the life insurance certificate. Chris and his wife stared at the notarized will and the life insurance certificate incredulously. I didn't hear about this. I don't know any of this. Changing the beneficiary of a life insurance doesn't necessarily notify the original beneficiary, so it's natural. Chris slammed his hand on the desk, saying that he didn't know it. But the lawyer cut him off sharply. Tony, feeling uneasy, asked me. When did Mom entrust you with all this? I didn't know anything. Didn't she want to tell me? I smiled at him and explained. It was written in the letter from Mother. She wanted to tell you too, but the risk of Chris and his wife finding out would be too high if we both acted, so she entrusted it only to me. I see. You and Mom really were close. As my husband and I were talking, Erica hysterically interrupted. I don't accept this. Why should you, who never showed Mom any grandchildren, inherit her estate? This is ridiculous. I can't accept this at all. That's right. You, the ungrateful ones, have no right to inherit Mom's property. We lived with her only because of her estate. It's ridiculous to split it equally. The estate should be all ours. Chris yelled, his face turning red. Moreover, Erica continued with her self-centered claims. We have 3 children. You should give up all of Mom's estate to us as compensation for not showing her any grandchildren. We, who were able to show her 3 grandchildren, are many times, hundreds of times more deserving than you. Therefore, the estate should all be ours. Unfazed by her bluster, I calmly said. What you've been saying makes no sense. Please calm down. Dissatisfied with my composed demeanor, Erica shouted. Your smug attitude is infuriating. Just give us the money. You childless, incompetent woman. With that, she lunged at me. Before my husband and the lawyer could intervene, Erica had already punched me in the head. Ouch. The rings on Erica's hand felt like brass knuckles, and the dull pain made me cry out. Stop it. My husband and the lawyer pulled Erica away. But in her unrelenting excitement, she reached out for me again. Give us the estate. We deserve it more than you, we have 3 children. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her face was like a demon's. Chris egged her on with, do it more, and my furious husband called the police. The police arrived soon, and my husband and the lawyer explained the situation. Chris and his wife were taken away by the police. Left behind, Tony and I thanked the lawyer and decided to send him home for today. It was supposed to be just a meeting about the inheritance division agreement. But it turned into a terrible ordeal. Tony and I nodded deeply, agreeing to visit him later in order to apologize. Tony was very concerned about me getting hit by Erica. But I reassured him that the pain in my head had completely subsided. Then he seemed relieved. After such a tumultuous day, I muttered. What an intense time that was. You know, Erica always seems to make a big deal about the kids, right? She's always said how great she is for showing Mom 3 grandchildren. And don't you think she's too greedy about money? Erica had indeed always been boastful about her children. And her obsession with money earlier was extreme. Well, yes. It's a bit abnormal that she wants all the inheritance even though Mom divided it equally. And the look on her face when she was hitting me was terrifying. Exactly. It's a bit abnormal, isn't it? After saying that, Tony fell silent, lost in thought. What's wrong? Is there something bothering you? Not knowing what he wanted to say, I asked him. Yeah. There's something I've been thinking about, and I think I should suggest it to Chris. Maybe we should get DNA tests for their 3 kids. His response surprised me. DNA tests. Yes, and I'm also thinking of suggesting a background check on Erica. Something just doesn't sit right with me. It's just a hunch, though. Honestly, I thought it might be unnecessary to go that far. But Tony's instincts had often been right before. All right. If you say so, let's suggest it to Chris. Later, when Tony brought up the idea to him, Chris ridiculed him and shouted angrily. Just because you don't have kids, don't doubt ours. Chris was shouting, but when parting, he seemed to snatch the DNA testing documents from Tony as if stealing them. Perhaps he also had his suspicions. The first results to come back were from the DNA tests for Chris and the kids. It turned out that the 2 youngest were not biologically related to him. What? I suspected the youngest because he doesn't look much like either parent. But the middle child too. Tony was speechless. Perhaps feeling liberated by the results, Chris conducted a thorough background check on Erica. The results were damning. It turned out that Erica had relationships with multiple men even before marrying Chris. Recently, the wives of those men found out and had demanded compensation for adultery. Erica, who was home for much longer hours than Chris, had been meticulously hiding legal notices and other documents. Looking at the details, the total amount of compensation was far beyond what Erica could cover with her earnings or savings. As a result, it seemed Erica was desperate to monopolize the inheritance. Naturally, this led to Chris and Erica getting into a violent argument, throwing things and physically fighting each other. They fought so fiercely that neighbors, unable to stand the noise, called the police. Both were taken away by the officers who responded to the call. As if the crime of forging the will wasn't enough, they now faced assault charges as well. Further investigations by the police revealed more crimes, including theft and stalking wealthy individuals. Eventually, Chris and Erica ended up behind bars. Tony and I agonized over what to do about the 3 children. With their grandmother gone, we were the closest relatives. We considered taking them in, but ultimately decided against it. The children were deeply influenced by their parents' views and openly called us childless and incompetent. The eldest was 14, old enough to know right from wrong. And even the youngest at 7 should know what is appropriate to say. Yet, every time they met us, all three would smirk and hurl insults. Their attitudes hadn't changed, even with their parents in trouble. "You childless incompetents would be lucky to raise us." I had never imagined that I would be told such a thing by a 14-year-old boy. Hearing such things, I couldn't love these children or believe I could raise them to be decent people. Ultimately, we contacted Erica's parents and decided to cut ties with the children. They seemed to understand our decision, saying, "Better the old hag's rundown house than staying with a childless, incompetent couple." We haven't told the children that the younger two of them are not biologically related to Chris. Whether to reveal that truth is up to Chris, Erica, and their relatives. Tony and I decided to use the inheritance to start anew in a distant, lush green area. We quickly felt at home. There's a quaint waffle shop near our house, and every time we pass by, I think how much Mom would have loved it. Soon after moving, I discovered I was pregnant. When the pregnancy test showed a positive result, I screamed with surprise and joy. The doctor confirmed it, and we cried tears of happiness, hugging each other. My mother-in-law would have been so happy. Additionally, the business plan I had secretly been preparing is also progressing well. Tony and I work hard for our forthcoming child, living fulfilling and happy days.